My name is Hazeblade, and I am a Resident Evil speedrunner, pretty much extraordinaire. I know a lot of different games, but ultimately I speedrun a lot of different Resident Evil games on Twitch. When speedrunning RE2, I would say some of the toughest challenges are specifically going to be around how you take advantage of, I would say, the number one, probably biggest mistake that the RE2 devs made when they built this game, which is optimizing the use of the knife. So the knife is the most powerful weapon in the game, which is unlike many other Resident Evil games, maybe with the exception of Code Veronica. I would say Code Veronica is probably the second most powerful game in terms of the knife use, but every frame that you generate that lines up within the number of keyframes that are available with the knife, which is a lot. I think it's like 240. We have to cap it to 120 to keep it fair for everybody, but every frame that generates between there is a possible chance for the knife to register a hit. So with that, the angle that you slash with matters as well. So if you're playing as Claire, that actually matters even more than with Leon, because she has a very awkward slashing angle, but you can actually use that to your advantage, and Claire's actually more efficient with the knife. But yeah, that is one of those things that when you master that, you've mastered a component that's going to save you a lot of time. You probably will reset a lot less when you can perfectly use the knife every time, because you'll be killing bosses on a much more consistent basis. Mr. X is a very interesting character in the game, because while he is incredibly intimidating, he has a lot of flaws in the speedrun. And while he can definitely still create some really scary moments, just about everything about Mr. X has some possible way to be manipulated. And one of the ways that we do that is through an aiming technique where you pretty much aim like center or upper mass. And as long as you're standing about 2 to 3 paces, it doesn't even have to be exact, really. He can actually, you can aim at him, and as he approaches you, when he comes into that range, he'll do the exact same thing. But as long as you're aiming like center upper mass, he'll actually do like it's sort of like a forward step, like hook punch attack, and you can just run straight through him and it won't hit you, and it's 100% consistent. So that's the easiest way to do it. However, where you can trip up is when he's on the other side of the door and you don't know exactly where he is. So you kind of have to, use a little bit of luck and also your spidey senses a little bit to kind of gauge about where he is in the room. And fortunately, the audio in RE2 Remake is amazing, that if you have a good ear, you actually can hear approximately where he is. If you're good at that sort of thing, you can hear approximately where he is in different rooms based off of the sounds that are coming from that room, how loud the sound is getting. You can hear it getting louder the closer he gets. So you can gauge that roughly, but it's definitely still a risk, because if you open that door and he's inside the door frame, he's going to throw you across the room, and it's not going to be a good time. So for the most part, though, he's pretty easy to manipulate, although being intimidating at first. Different types of manipulation, such as stair skating. So if I had to explain it to somebody that didn't know really much of anything about speedrunning, essentially it is a glitch that we can take advantage of in the game to optimize our movement. So what you would do specifically in RE2 Remake is you would lightly tap if you're on PC, you would lightly tap the right mouse button or whichever button you use on a controller to aim. And what that does is the character starts and finishes an aiming animation, which actually causes them to sort of slide down the stairs just a little bit faster than they would if they were just running down the stairs, which it seems like a minor trick to just move a little bit faster, but it actually saves quite a bit of time over the course of the entire run. When you're running as Claire, it's a lot more intricate of a speed run because you have to be in caution. It means that your available health pool and range or opportunity window of making mistakes is much smaller than it is with Leon. Interestingly enough, because Leon, he doesn't move faster or slower in caution. He does move a little bit slower with the stair skating component, as we talked about earlier, when he is in caution, but you at least can take a couple hits before you have to start worrying about like, oh, I'm going to be in danger and be limping here. But with Claire, specifically on standard difficulty, which is the main category, you can pretty much only take one hit outside of that. And that's like in the first half of the run before moving into danger. Once you get past the RPD and you start moving into the later sections of the game, it's pretty much one hit and done. before your run is over. So very much driving importance of just learning enemy movement patterns and getting down the consistency piece of knowing what to do when this zombie spawns, over here versus, facing the other direction or what have you. But ultimately, it's a lot of attention to detail to know based on what pattern you're getting, how to handle that, so that way you take as little damage as possible. And at this point, I'm pretty sure in the Claire runs, I haven't run Claire in some time competitively, but I'm pretty sure that run is now at a point where you pretty much can't take any damage or it's over. I wish that there was just a golden rule that everyone could follow to automatically become a world record speedrunner, but ultimately, I would say if there is a big secret, it's really just patience. And I'd say that applies to RE2 Remake, but it applies to every speed game. No speed game is learned in just the matter of a couple hours or within your first playthrough. But what I can say is that through patience and through, rallying together as a community to help learn different ways to tackle boss fights and approach certain situations, ultimately the sense of patience that you have as an individual, but also the sense of community when people come together to help discover different boss strats and things like that. I'd say it's really kind of both of those things, but really the patience to actually persevere through all of the practice and the trial runs and the resetting, that really is the ticket with RE2 Remake. But I say it with RE2 Remake, but it really applies to every speed game. What got me into speedrunning was a lot of trial and error. So I actually began streaming before I started speedrunning, and I was playing a lot of Dark Souls 3. It's all started with this challenge to try to reach level 802, which is the max level in Dark Souls 3, without any cheats. And so I kind of had to learn how to speedrun the game in order to go to an NPC in the game that gives you 5 free levels every time you talk to him in a brand new playthrough. So I was like, all right, I gotta be kind of efficient here, otherwise it's gonna take forever. So I started trying to learn how to speedrun Dark Souls 3. What I learned in the process is that I'm a great Dark Souls 3 player. I'm not a great Dark Souls 3 speedrunner. So it did open up my mind to speedrunning a little bit more though. So that's ultimately how I stumbled on GDQ and several runners who really caught my eye, specifically Bloodborne runners like Jesus Here's Toast, as well as Resident Evil HD Remaster runners such as Pessimism. And so when I started watching these runners, I ultimately tried my hand at Bloodborne first. That also didn't work out. And then I ultimately landed on Resident Evil HD Remaster as my first speed game. And that's really kind of what it all really sort of took off from there. I would definitely say that I gel with Resident Evil very much. It's a game that I grew up playing. So my earliest memories of playing video games started with the very first Resident Evil game, which, it came out in 1996. Like, I watched my dad play that game, ultimately Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 as well, and started learning how to play them myself, which, freaked out as a young child. And somehow my parents decided that it was okay for me to play those games. But all in all, though, amazing memories of playing those games, despite how horrified I was to play them sometimes. Growing up along with, seeing the characters' growth over the progression of the series has impacted me in a very positive way. My favorite speed game is, I'm generally not the type of person to have favorites. I can tell you that the game that I've spent the most time with is definitely RE2 Remake. What I will say from a speedrunning standpoint, though, is that I will hold RE1 Remake very near and dear to my heart for a couple of reasons. A, it's arguably one of my favorite Resident Evil games of all time. Maybe not my all-time favorite, but from a speedrunning standpoint, when you add that component to it, and the fact that the randomizer for that game is absolutely incredible. Even like speedrunning the randomizer, for example, it's still sitting in my YouTube uploads that I haven't released yet. But a few months ago, I did a tyrant-only randomizer run. So all the items shuffled around the mansion, and it was only tyrants in the rooms. So somehow I managed to get through. I think it took me like 2 hours and 50 minutes or something like that to get through it. But I still like to use the speedrun strats, like there's stair skating in RE1 Remake as well, like using those strats and doing quick menuing and stuff like that. But I would say from a just overall, it's kind of where I got my start as a speedrunner, where I got like that was the first game that I mastered. So it's definitely kind of one of my first games, but also it's kind of near and dear to me just because I've spent so much time with it, and it kind of, made me into the speedrunner that I am today. So it's definitely, Resident Evil 1 Remake is definitely one of my favorite games of all time from the RE franchise. But despite the fact that I'm not a very good speedrunner at it, Resident Evil 3 Classic is actually my favorite Resident Evil game of all time. I think the sort of choose your own adventure component of it I love role-playing games, and in fact, Hazeblade, my name, where it came from, is from World of Warcraft, which is my Death Knight's character name. So from that context, the role-playing component where you can kind of like choose where you want to go and the story changes as the result of your decisions, that's like one of my favorite things about gaming in general, is that element of choice. And the fact that we have that in a Resident Evil game and seeing the way that things unfold, it makes it an obvious first for me. The RE series to me is something that has always shown a very strong sense ever since, the classic games developed into a full-blown franchise. For me, it's always been about character growth and seeing, even in later iterations of the game, regardless of what people think about, how the game's changed and whatever their opinions may be, seeing the characters grow over time is something that I try to do every day. I always try to be a better person tomorrow than I am today. I try to be a better speedrunner tomorrow than I was today. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm not succeeding in my own personal life goals. So really what the RE franchise means to me is it's about growth. It's about progression. It's about getting better every day and overcoming adversity. I think honestly, the story in Resident Evil 5, for example, I'm in the same boat where like Resident Evil 5 gameplay wise isn't my, like it's definitely towards the bottom of my list, but I remember, spoilers for anybody that might, haven't played it yet, but at the end of the game when he's holding Sheva and it's sort of like a life or death situation and he flashes back to when he had the opportunity to save Jill, like that was a moment where like it kind of hit me in the feels because he's like, like I'm not going to fail this time. And so that was something that just like from just a narrative standpoint, I was like, oh, my heart, But it was a great game from a narrative standpoint for sure. I think what's next, what I would like to see is, this is probably a hot take, but I do think that we've seen the characters from the original games start to get tired. We've seen that over the course of several games in the last decade. Specifically in RE6, you start to see Chris almost turn into like, a disgruntled soldier, right? Almost kind of like almost reminds me of Solid Snake, which my community knows that very well because I do a Snake impression. But yeah, so I start to see him become that like disgruntled soldier, just like wanting to kind of just, not really care about what he's fighting for anymore and just not really into it anymore and just wants to be away from it all. But very much like Snake, always pulled back into it for some reason or another. So, that's, as far as what's next, it's hard to say because while I love those characters, Village is right around the corner and, I get the hint that like, maybe it's time for Chris to retire. I don't know. It makes me a little nervous because I do love the character, but at the same time, he's if we're going by Batman standards, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. So they're definitely taking that stance and kind of making him seem like a villain now. So I'm not sure what that's actually going to look like. But, I would love to see more of Jill in the franchise. I think she definitely deserves some more love and attention, and especially considering RE3 Classic is my favorite game of all time, partially because I love her and Carlos's relationship. So I would love to see Jill sort of make a return. As far as we know, lore-wise, she went to rehab after RE5 to deal with the traumatizing events that kind of happened during that time period when she was being experimented on. So, I would love to see what that sort of turns into and where her involvement may be from there. But, ultimately, I'm always open to new characters coming into the franchise because ultimately that kind of reinvigorates that sense of horror. I think we saw a great example of that in Resident Evil 7 when in the first few minutes of the game, your hand's been chopped off. If you play a game a certain way, you also get your leg chopped off. And you're like, am I even going to make it like out of this room, let alone, the rest of this house? And it was so beautifully done with completely new characters in a way that really, in my opinion, I felt like, as they had marketed, evil came home, so to speak. So, as far as what's next, again, bringing it full circle, I'd love to see more of the characters that were main characters that didn't really get as much screen time, like Jill, maybe a little bit of Carlos, since those are two of my favorite characters. But maybe we'll find out, since Nikolai's ending in RE3 Remake was a little more open-ended, maybe we'll see what happens with him, because a lot of people don't know this. There was a second helicopter on that roof. But yeah, so that's kind of what I would love to see in the future, is just the return of some characters that maybe didn't get as much screen time, but just continuing to keep the horror roots in place. A Code Veronica remake? Absolutely. It's if we just look at overall game time period of when that game came out, it is, like, in my opinion, it's a masterpiece, to be honest. I mean, again, it's right up there in terms of one of my favorite games of all time. I actually haven't learned how to speedrun it. I'm afraid to, because I don't know if it's going to take away from my enjoyment of the game. Sometimes that happens when you're a speedrunner. But in my opinion, that game, in the context of what it is a masterpiece. Now, a lot of people will say don't remake a masterpiece, and I think that there is some degree of truth to that. However, I think with how beautifully the RE2 remake turned out, I think if the right team and the right support and the direction is taken with Code Veronica, I absolutely think a remake could and should be done absolutely beautifully. We've got a lot of RE content coming this year, specifically on the screen space. We've got Welcome to Raccoon City coming out in September. I'm very excited for that. Infinite Darkness also looks like it's going to be amazing. I know they haven't revealed too much about the Netflix series. I think it's a Netflix series, like a live action series. I know they haven't revealed too much about that, but it looks interesting. So as far as just all of the content that's coming in the relatively near future, couldn't be more excited.